Thank you very much. Well, it's absolutely great to be here today. Whatever time it is for you, it's about lunchtime for me. Absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you and to talk a little bit about our experience over the last sort of 18 months or so, because it's fair to say that Altitude Foundation has learned quite a lot over the course of the pandemic. It had a real impact on the way that we deliver our activity, on the way that we think about what we're doing. And hopefully some of the things that I share with you today, you might be able to use now or in the future in your own practice. Firstly, just to start off with a little bit of sort of context about ourselves, because I think it's important to understand who we are and what we do. So we're based in the northeast of England. We're a charity that focuses on supporting young people to access digital and tech careers, but we're particularly focused on young people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. And we know that in the northeast of England, there are plenty of communities that need that additional support in order for the young people there to thrive, to smash barriers, to fulfill their potential. And we believe that digital careers, tech careers, that kind of knowledge, experience, and skill set is so important and such a great way for them to be able to just do something really exciting with their lives. So we cover a whole range of things, but crucially and particularly in the context of this session, we help them to develop their skills, their knowledge, and their experience of programming and coding. And it will come as no surprise to you that we use the Microbit as a key piece of tech to help us to do that. So I refer in the title to the digital gap. You might know it as the digital divide, you might know it as the digital gap, you might know it by other means. But essentially what we're talking about here is the fact that access to digital technology, access to digital opportunities, there is a divide based on socioeconomic circumstances. And that happens right across the world. I think it happens anywhere at all. And really, crucially, the thing to remember is that it isn't the case that everyone is in a fortunate enough position that, like myself, I'm able to join you today. I've got my laptop, I've got my webcam, I've got all my kit, and I've got a stable broadband connection. I can access this, that's no problem. Back in March of 2020, the UK went into lockdown as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And on a personal level, I had to work from home. I was sat at this desk that I'm sitting at now today. And largely speaking, I was able to get on with things as I had been, because I'm fortunate, I'm lucky that I have a house with a decent broadband connection. I've got the tech, I've got the setup, I've got somewhere that I can sit and work in peace and quiet whenever my cats aren't disturbing me. And it's very easy to take that for granted, actually. But one of the things that we found during lockdown was that the young people that we were working with really struggled, actually. And there were a lot of communities experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage that weren't as fortunate as I was, or maybe as you were, in terms of being able to access all of the sudden explosion of remote and online content. You know, that shift to Zoom, you know, I'm sure we've all, you know, used Zoom, we've used Teams, we've used Google Meet, we've used Hopin, you know, all of these technologies and solutions that helped us get around some of the challenges presented by lockdown. Not necessarily the easiest for absolutely everybody to address. And we did participate in a little bit of research with a research collective called Not Equal, talking about the experiences that our target beneficiaries were experiencing and those of other charities. And, you know, they talked about access issues, they talked about the economic barriers actually to participating online, because you've got to be able to pay for your internet connection, buy the kit that you need, all of that sort of thing. There were also fundamental issues of digital literacy. So by that, what I'm talking about is that, you know, some people are just not familiar enough with the technology that they've got to be able to access the opportunities that are out there online and so on and so forth. And there were also challenges they noted with culture change, that actually people were used to doing things a certain way, and it wasn't easy for everybody to shift to a new way of doing things. The Sutton Trust, which is a charity in the UK that looks at social mobility issues, identified that there was a real differential between less well-off kids and their better-off peers in terms of the amount of online content they were able to access, the amount of time that they were able to spend on it. And a lot of that flowed from things like the number of devices that they had in the home. So, you know, the numbers are there on the screen. I don't need to read them out to you, but you can see that, you know, that there were some fundamental issues for some of the less well-off kids in our country, and particularly from our focus in the northeast of England. And the government did do a sort of a laptop rollout and that sort of thing to try and address these issues. But it's fair to say that just rolling out laptops for kids to be able to access online content wasn't the only issue that they were experiencing. And I want to come to some of the issues that we became aware of over the practice of dealing with this during lockdown. But the crucial thing for us was that we had been working with a cohort of young people. Everything had been going really well up until March. Then we hit lockdown. We shifted to remote and online delivery, and we lost touch with, I would say, at least half of our regular participants. And that half of our regular participants we didn't see again, and we haven't worked with since lockdown. And there are all sorts of reasons why that might have been the case, but it became a real sort of existential issue for us, actually, that we needed to think very, very carefully about how we were delivering our activity to make sure that we were reaching the kids that we wanted to reach. We weren't interested in just working with any kids who were able to access our material. We were particularly interested in working with those kids who might not otherwise be able to access the kind of opportunities that we were providing. This is very much our reason for being, our reason for existing. Our mission is to work with those kids who wouldn't otherwise get access to these kinds of opportunities, the opportunities to develop their programming and coding skills, to find out more about digital and tech careers. So it really spoke to the very heart of what we do as a charity, to try and figure out how exactly do we make sure that the activity that we are delivering is accessible, that no matter what kind of background the kids are coming from, they can participate in what we're delivering. And we thought, prior to lockdown in March 2020, that we'd thought about a lot of these issues, because we'd said to ourselves, we want to make sure that there are no barriers in place that we can possibly control to make sure that the young people that we want to work with have the greatest possible opportunity to take part in what we're doing. So whenever we find that half of our participants just disappear almost overnight and we can't get in touch with them, we can't get them along to the activities that we're delivering online and remote, we needed to think very, very carefully about what it was that we were doing, how we did it, to make sure that we were making our activities accessible to everyone. So there's sort of two aspects to this, I think it's fair to say. There's the technology side of it, and there's also a kind of a social side that I'll come to in a second. But what we learned over the course of the lockdown, and as we sort of tested things out and experimented and trialed and had to get really quite creative in terms of the way that we did things. Bearing in mind that previously what we did was a lot of schools-based activity. We went into schools, we used the school facilities, we provided microbits to the kids that we were working with, and we allowed them to, engage in our activity in that school setting. We obviously couldn't do that face-to-face with them. The schools were the premises were closed, everything was remote. So we needed to think very carefully about what we were doing. The first thing that we realized was that all of our delivery had to be device agnostic. And I mean to the point where we had to be able to make sure that the activity that we were delivering, if the young people that we were working with could only, for example, access it through a mobile phone, we needed to make sure that they could do that. So we weren't assuming that they definitely had a laptop. We weren't assuming that they were definitely running Windows, that they could definitely access a particular platform for the delivery of content. We had to, as much as possible, make sure that our delivery was device agnostic and they could access it from almost anything. We needed to make sure that there was no specialist equipment, because unlike whenever we were delivering in schools, and we could assume that maybe the schools would have certain pieces of kit or materials, or we could bring them along and provide them with particular technology or that kind of thing, we needed to make sure that the activities we were delivering required no specialist equipment whatsoever. We also needed to bear in mind that unfortunately, in some homes, they didn't have, a stable broadband connection. Some kids were having to join our activity through their mobile data connections. Some households were working off kind of broadband dongles and that kind of thing. Sometimes they did have a broadband connection, but more than one person was trying to access content at the same time. So we needed to make sure that we were avoiding sort of high data load activity as much as possible, trying to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. And we also needed to make sure that we were accommodating a variety of abilities, confidence levels, that kind of thing. Because whenever you've got the kids in front of you and the schools are engaged and the staff in the schools are helping you out and that kind of thing, it's very easy to support young people coming from a range of different sort of ability levels. Whenever you're working with them remotely, it's harder to pick up whenever they're possibly struggling with a particular aspect of what you're delivering. You don't necessarily have the same level of support that you can put around them. So we needed to make sure that the activity was flexible and it could accommodate that variety as best as possible. But crucially, there was also the social side, which I think is often one of the things that gets overlooked in these circumstances. So as I mentioned to you before, I'm very fortunate. I've got a desk. It's in my bedroom, in fairness, but I've got a desk. I've got a dedicated space that I can work from. Some of the young people that we were working with weren't necessarily going to have one of those kind of dedicated spaces. They weren't going to have, a quiet area in the home that they could do things. There were potentially going to be competing demands on their time. We probably all experienced, if we've gone through lockdown, that feeling sometimes of just having a day where, everything just feels a little bit overwhelming. You want to make sure that everything's kind of as simple and straightforward as possible as you're getting involved in it. So we needed to really think about how do we facilitate, that social side of the digital divide, because it isn't simply about the technology. So we started to find things like making sure that they didn't need to have their video feeds on, because if you don't have, if you've got a lot of stuff going on in the background, if you don't have a quiet space to sit, sometimes you don't want people to be seeing all of that. So we often said, don't worry about having your video feed on. We'll trust that you're there and you're accessing the content. That's not a problem. We also find that young people much preferred to engage with us through text, chat sort of functions, rather than switching on the audio and talking. For me, I quite like talking. I love chatting to people. I had no problem at all with getting on my Zoom calls, talking to my colleagues, having that kind of discussion. Felt a little bit different talking face to face, but I got used to it. That was fine. But for some of our young people, that was just too much of a barrier. But using the text functions, using chat functions, that was fine. And actually, we found that the engagement increased if we used those kind of solutions. We also had to recognize that we had to be flexible about when we were delivering activity. So not just assuming that, the typical kind of after school time as we maybe would have been doing previously, or, always doing it, say on a Saturday or on a Wednesday evening or whatever it was. We needed to be flexible around the dates and times that we were actually delivering the activity. And then one of the most important things we found was that we needed to keep things short and keep them simple. So that meant tailoring our activity so that we could deliver it in a much, much quicker kind of time frame than we maybe would have done whenever we were face to face. We've probably all experienced that Zoom fatigue, that feeling of, sitting in front of a screen for far, far too long and just needing to get away from it all. Being in front of a screen all day, every day is more tiring than being face to face, being in person, that sort of thing. So we find that, if our young people that we were working with had, for example, been, on, remote classes at school all day, coming on for another hour and a half of a session was sometimes just too much of an ask for them. Keeping it short, keeping it simple, keeping it straightforward, we find that improved engagement immensely. So the tech side and the social side, both of those things we needed to address. So what we found as well was that actually the microbit was pretty much the perfect solution for some of the things that we were trying to address. We were using the microbit already, but the microbit for me really came into its own as we started to shift to this kind of online and remote delivery. And that's for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a standalone device. If you've got a microbit and something that you can program it from, you can do your activity. You don't need a whole bunch of peripherals. It's great if you can add stuff to it, but you don't need it because it stands alone. It operates on its own terms if you need it to. You've got the Make code editor, browser-based. I go back to that idea of it being device agnostic. You can use it anywhere. The Microbit Classroom was great for us to be able to see the kids' code, give them feedback, talk to them about what they were doing, provide them with code if they were struggling a little bit. Great facility to just make sure that we were still able to do that sort of back and forth with them. And being able to code in the blocks-based editor and also in JavaScript or Python was great because it meant that we could accommodate those varying ability levels that I mentioned before. So actually the microbit for us, as I say, really came into its own. And one of the things that I really like about the Make code editor, I must say, is the fact that if we're working with young people who don't have a microbit, you've got the simulator, which is just fantastic because it means that you can say to the kids, all you need is a device that can access the internet and a browser, and we can take you through whatever it is that we're doing. So the microbit was absolutely crucial for us. Case study that I wanted to give you is an activity that we called Code and Send. And the idea there was that we took the kids through a coding activity. So what you've got here is a screenshot of us in the middle of showing them how to code a particular bit of it. And the idea was that they would code it, they would follow along with us, they sent us their code, and then we showed them their code in action on a microbit. So that was for those kids who didn't have that piece of technology for themselves at home. So they were able to go onto the editor, they were able to code along with us, they sent us the code, and then they were able to see, oh, I've just lost that, hang on a second. Why has that stopped? Let me try that again. I'm not sure why that quit. So yeah, they were able to follow along with us, which was absolutely crucial. They were able to send the code to us, and then we were able to show them and actually show their code coming to life. So a couple of things that I've highlighted on the screen there. Obviously, in the sort of the main element of the screen is us sharing the code that we're doing, allowing them to code along with us. But over on the side, hopefully what you can see there is that there are some video feeds. That's my colleagues presenting the activity, taking the kids along, showing them the code in action. The kids themselves, their video feeds were off. They were engaging with us in the chat. And that was far, far easier for them. It cut down on the bandwidth requirement. It was much more comfortable for them. And they got as much out of the session as they would have done if the video feeds were on. A simple thing, but actually really important for making things more accessible for them. Another case study I wanted to share with you was what we called our code cooperatives. So these are sessions that we still run, but we had to shift to delivering them remotely when the schools were open, but they weren't allowing any visitors on site. And what we were able to do there actually was start to deliver activity in parallel. And one of the interesting things for me is that, some of what we did during lockdown was born out of necessity. It was because we had to do it. We didn't have a choice. But what we found was that some of the things that we were doing, we wanted to continue. So running our code cooperatives remotely, delivering stuff through the Microbit Classroom, using the Make code editor, using whatever the schools wanted us to use in terms of, was it Zoom, was it Google Meet, whatever it was, to deliver the activity. The kids were on site, in school, in computer classrooms. We were in the office or at home, depending on the circumstances, delivering the activity remotely. But it meant that we were actually able to deliver activity to more than one school at once. And what we actually do now with some of our schools is we've just continued that, because they've said, you know what, this really works for us. And from our perspective, it means that instead of us having to go to 5 or 6 different schools separately and try and find the time for all of that, we deliver one session to all of them at the same time. It enables us to be in more than one place at once. So this is actually one of those things where, you know, as I say, born out of necessity in the first instance, but actually we've continued to do it. And the final case study that I want to mention to you isn't actually Microbit related, but there's a key point that I want to come to for why it is that I'm sharing this case study with you. Because one of the things that we actually did during lockdown in the end was we created pen and paper based coding activities, because we said to ourselves, if we want to be maximally accessible, if we want to make sure as many kids as possible can access this activity, can we deliver the coding and programming concepts that we want them to understand and learn without even needing to use a device at all? So we created Coding at Home, which is a booklet of activities that they could use during lockdown. One of the examples there that I've given you just a sort of a little snippet of was about decomposing recommendation algorithms. The idea there being, look, you know, if we really want to remove any possible barrier to engagement, can we do it without any reference to tech, but still make sure that they're learning the fundamental concepts? And the reason for that, I think, is there are many reasons, but key, I think, is actually that second point on what is my final slide here, which is to be clear on what is necessary, what's sufficient, and what's optional. And one of the things that I would say is that there are plenty of things that, frankly, you would do if you had the opportunity. I am the first to accept and admit that in the vast majority of cases, delivering activity for young people face to face, where they can get hands-on with the microbit, where they can add the peripherals on, where they can do all sorts of different complicated, complex things, that is, you know, preferable in the vast majority of instances. But when your back's against the wall, whenever you still want to deliver that activity, you really have to ask yourself, well, what is the fundamental thing that we're trying to do? What is the absolutely necessary thing? And we said, well, actually, what we're really fundamentally trying to do here is to help them to understand programming concepts, key foundational aspects of what it means to program something, to break down a problem, to see your way to a solution, all of that kind of thing. So we were really clear about what is it that's actually necessary, what's sufficient, what will do in the circumstances that you find yourselves in, and what is it that maybe, you know, you would prefer to do it, you would like to do it, it might be better to do it if you could, but it is ultimately an optional thing in the overall grand scheme of things. And that's why I say, you know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because, you know, there is always sort of a way, you know, you want to add all of the things and you want to get it all sort of whiz bang, really exciting, really cool, all of that sort of thing. But it is the case that sometimes you can still get that core concept, the really important thing that you're trying to get across, without giving, you know, that, taking it to that kind of perfect level. And that means being creative. It means thinking outside the box. You know, we probably wouldn't have dreamt up all of the sort of the ways that we dreamt up to address the issues that we were facing if we hadn't been presented with a lockdown, with social distancing, with schools being closed, all of that kind of thing. But by doing that, it really made us understand far better the barriers that the young people that we were trying to work with are actually experiencing. And it's enriched and improved the activity that we deliver now that we're not experiencing the same kind of restrictions in terms of delivery. It's made us much more acutely aware of those technological and social barriers. And the thing that I kind of want to leave you with is that sense that we need to be so acutely aware of the of those barriers, we need to go beyond the technological barriers that they might be facing that we can probably guess around, the type of tech they have and that kind of thing, but also to think about the social barriers that the young people that we're wanting to work with might be addressing. Because if we do that, then ultimately we work with a broader range of young people, which I think is absolutely key. I think we're all united by a belief that we want to broaden the number of young people that are developing these core and critical digital skills. We want to make sure as many of them as possible are able to access those kind of experiences. And that means being really, really clear about where those barriers come in and where you can actually remove that barrier for them and make it easier for them to be able to access the content that you're delivering. So that is a really quick run through of some of the things that we've done over the course of the past 18 months. And I say, of some things that we're actually still continuing because we find that in some cases it's a better way of doing things than we've done them before. But I wanted to leave it there because if there are any questions, if anyone has anything that they want to ask, I'm more than happy to take questions at this point. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for coming along and listening to me today. It's been great to spend time with everyone virtually at Microbit Live, and I look forward to seeing you here and in the next sessions. If anyone has any questions, happy to take them. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so up until this point, I think everyone's just been super engaged with your talk, Colin. So we don't have any questions leading up to this point, but of course we do still have a couple minutes. So if anyone would like to hop in with a question now in the chat, please feel free. In the meantime, Colin, thank you so much for your session. Still super important. I mean, as much as, well, I mean, in a couple ways, as much as I'm sure we're all just ready to be beyond the COVID learning situation and the remote learning and all that. I think fact of the matter is in some ways the remote learning is inclusive and more supportive, regardless, right? It's just kind of it may just be the new norm moving forward for some, but also for some, we just are still forced into that situation. And even this past week, I was doing some classroom visits, and I feel like some of the topics you covered, just in terms of the accessibility of it and just taking into consideration the needs of each individual student. We were doing some Minecraft work, and some of the students that were watching, it was too much for their devices to be able to tune into the lesson and also run. Sorry for the puppy barking. And also, too much to watch and also participate. And so, of course, that's where the Microbit shines. It's low maintenance, and as you mentioned, it doesn't perfect doesn't need to be, as much as I'm sure so many of us educators and so many of the people that I'm sure are here attending Microbit. I'm sure we have a lot of outstanding educators here that love to go above and beyond. And sometimes it's important just to take a step back and it's just a matter of, can the student participate at all? Because if we're trying to overload them,
Yeah,
so
I think it was just so interesting for us that we thought that we had challenged our assumptions around what the barriers were, and lockdown really forced us to reassess that and realize that actually, we thought we were a charity that had got this right, and we hadn't. There was still more that we could learn. Because I always sort of think to myself that there's some easy stuff here around, if you say, come along to our coding club, bring your own laptop, right? You probably, can guess that for some kids, they're not going to have a laptop that they can bring along. So that means automatically they're not coming along to the coding club, but it was all that other stuff around, purchasing, a piece of kit or a peripheral, or, having a quiet space to do something or that kind of thing. And it was like, well, actually, we can do a lot with the kids that we're working with simply with the Make Code editor. And all they need, I can see someone in the chat there has mentioned about, working on a single phone screen. That's exactly it. Like you that's not ideal. You wouldn't do it if you chose to, but you can if you need to, and you can actually do quite a lot if you're prepared to be inventive and creative and say, well, what is actually like the absolute fundamental necessity here, and what's the nice to have.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why it's so important that we talk about it. You know, it's as much bad that has come from the pandemic, it's also, as you mentioned, you know, whether for you know, your charity or just for a lot of educational institutions, like it's really forced us to realize the divide across you know, a lot of our students, even just, you know, within the same classroom. I've, you know, again, with some of those online classroom visits that I've done, you see some students and they have a question to ask, but they're also in a room with three of their siblings that are also in class, and you know, and that's even if they're lucky enough to each have a device. As you know, Tanya mentioned just the availability of time and access to, say, a device in a household. So, you know, I mean, I'm sure we can go on and on and on, but just the main point being, you know, Colin, importance of your session today and the importance of continuing to have these discussions, because it's, you know, regardless of the pandemic, this will continue to be an ongoing barrier that we as educators need to be, as you said, creative and inventive about how we support our students. So, with that being said, we're wrapping up towards the end of our time. So, you know, Colin, if you do happen to have anything else you want to mention, I just, you know, before you do, I just want to say thank you once more for an amazing session, and everyone in chat, thank you for your ongoing participation. It's been an incredible day. Colin, if you have anything, please feel free to take it away. Otherwise, I'll close us off.
No, I think I've probably spoken enough for everyone's sake, but just to say, like, genuinely, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak today, because, you know, it was really important to me and to the charity to be able to share some of our experiences and what we've learned, because if it helps someone else, then we're delighted. And if it expands opportunities, then that's what we're here for.
Amazing. And I'm sure that's what a lot of us are here for, is to contribute. So thank you again, Colin. Hope you have a great day and get to warm up a little. And thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. You may press the leave button in the top right of your screen. I don't know if I'm pointing the right way, but have a great rest of your day. And then you can choose your next session over on the left-hand side. Take care, everyone.